What's going on, Star Wars fans?
Hello there.
We are here with another special guest on our podcast, Star Wars Jedi Chat. We have an amazing guest today. He is a best-selling author of several of the Star Wars books. He's here with us today, James
Luceno.
How are you?
I'm very glad to be with you guys.
Oh, we're so happy to have you on here. So excited that you
I don't do many of these. So
we really appreciate that.
Yeah. I'm probably very rusty.
So are we. It's okay.
The last one I did, in fact, was this guy has done a documentary on the new Jedi Order. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Oh, yeah.
Like a 6-part documentary. So he interviewed me for that series.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen any of the documentary, but it's really interesting because he interviewed all the authors who were involved. Mm-hmm. And in fact, everybody who was involved in that series. And the documentary is really interesting.
That's awesome. What year did those get released?
Early 2000s, from maybe 2001 to 2006 or 7. I can't remember.
I recall when I was a kid, I was a kid during the prequels coming out,
right,
big time, and all of the expanded universe stuff was either like New Jedi Order or some really good comics about the prequels and everything leading up. It was a very rich time for new literature coming out, and that's what got me into all that. But
I like your shirt, by the way.
Oh, thank you. One of my favorites.
It's great.
You know this guy.
I know that guy.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what we'd like to do is just start out, and obviously you're a fan of Star Wars, and maybe just give us a little history of, again, when you started, if it was back in 77 with everything, and then so on and so forth, and then maybe let us know when George or Disney got a hold of you to do some books. I guess it would be George, correct? Because there was no Lucasfilm, because Disney hadn't taken over until
like 2012. Or,
yeah.
So
I'll take you back. I saw the films when I was not a youngster. And I went to the screening of what was Star Wars before it was New Hope, with Brian Daley, who was my friend, who was also one of the first writers for the Star Wars franchise. We went to some Cineplex in New Jersey and just had our minds blown. Brian was a real hardcore science fiction fan, and I remember when we were leaving the theater, he said that he had finally seen on screen what he had always imagined in his mind. Yeah. And so it was so perfect when a year later he got the assignment to do those 3 Han Solo novels. So I was very close friends with Brian, and was kind of a sounding board for those novels while he was writing them. And then when Ballantine then had the license for Star Wars, and they were going to surrender the license because they just weren't making enough money. But they asked Brian and me to pitch one final idea for Star Wars. And Brian pitched a series that would have been like what Timothy Zahn ended up doing with the Thrawn series. And I pitched a book called The Tao of the Force, which George shot down immediately. He said, I'm not turning the Force into a religion. So I don't want this kind of book. And it's funny because over the years, he's sort of backpedaled on that. And there's been plenty of books about the Force. But so my involvement with Star Wars continued all through the Bantam era. But then when Bantam lost the license back to Del Rey, the notion was to do this New Jedi Order series. And I had been an author for Del Rey Valentine, and they asked me to join that project as a consultant. The reason why is Brian and I had done an adaptation of an anime called Robotech, which was big television show in the United States. It was sort of the show the animation that introduced anime to U.S. audiences. And we had done an adaptation of that, 21 books. And so Del Rey felt that I would be good to consult on this big NJO series that was being planned at Lucasfilm. So I came on originally as a consultant, and then they offered me a novel in the series, then a second novel, then 19 books later, the wrap-up novel to that series. And then I ended up for the next 15 years writing for Star Wars and Lucasfilm.
That's really cool. That's do you know, just through your friend and through writing through Del Rey and Valentine, did you have other books already out there and they saw that and asked you?
Yeah, I had I'd started out as an action adventure novelist, and Valentine published my first novel back in 1980. Then I did a couple of science fiction novels under my own name for them. The thing that Brian and I wrote for a TV series called The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers, which led to Robotech, and then that led to Star Wars. So I had a history with Del Rey and with Valentine. And for the new Jedi Order, they were basically using a lot of the authors that they had published over the years.
Oh, very cool. I would guess it's sort of like your kids. Do you have a favorite that you've written for Star Wars?
A favorite novel?
Yeah.
I would have to be Darth Plagueis, because I spent the most time with that novel. I was thrilled to get that assignment. I remember I was in Guatemala. I had just been hiking to some Maya ruins, and I came out after a long hike. The hotel I was staying in had just gotten its first computer and internet connection. And I sat down, and there was an email from Lucasfilm saying, would you like to do the backstory of Darth Plagueis? And I was like thrilled, because I had, they'd just been touched on in the films, but we didn't know anything about him. Mm-hmm. So I dove in and spent a little time on my outline. I was so confident of the outline that I actually started the novel. It was like 100 pages into the novel when I submitted the outline to Lucasfilm, and they rejected the outline.
Oh, wow.
They said, yes. In fact, the comment was, Luceno obviously doesn't understand the Sith.
Oh.
So, which is like really crushing. But I had done so much work, just so much research, and I it was so close to me at that point. About 6 months later, I asked Lucasfilm if we could revisit my outline. So I went out there and had some story meetings and convinced them to let me go forward with the book in a different way. Finally got it published. So it was so that's the one that's closest to my heart, I think, because there was so much tragedy involved in it.
So with your outline, did you just change it up a little bit and go a different way, or
I originally I don't know if you're familiar with Mike Stackpole. He's a Star Wars writer, very popular writer. He did a novel, I think must have been back in the 80s, called I, Jedi.
Yeah.
He wrote it in the first person. And I thought that I would try Darth Plagueis in the first person. Mm-hmm. And that just didn't work. Good. So that was one thing that really changed. Another thing was, instead of having him as the banker he is in novel, I had him as a master holo chess. So there were changes.
Strategist.
And yeah, exactly. Yeah. So a lot of it I ended up using, but I just had to convince the powers that be that I did know the Sith a little bit. so they gave me the go-to.
That's awesome. Plagueis has really affected people like myself, who, of course, grew up with the prequels and hear that one line of, have you ever heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
And wonder, well, what's that about?
Right.
So it was a pretty significant thing to get to see it happen on the page, to live in that. And I feel like Plagueis and other books such as Cloak of Deception or Labyrinth of Evil gave a ton of extra depth to those three films. A lot of political drama and intrigue, but also mixed like the mythology and the philosophy that makes up the mysticism of Star Wars. So how did you approach, or how do you approach in all these works, that realism that you bring to it? Because there's so much of Plagueis or even Catalyst where it's very realistic means that these big characters are able to set themselves up for what we see in the films. For example, Plagueis and Sidious infiltrating politics and banking, and that's very, very real world stuff that makes so much sense. And I bring it up on our podcast all the time that there's really interesting things in Star Wars that are very real and hit us in a certain way. So how did you approach blending sort of that realism into a story like that could have gone, into sorcerer territory,
I think because I didn't begin as a science fiction writer or a fantasy writer. And my influences were Ian Fleming's James Bond books and the Matt Helm series. And I've just always been a fan of Robert Ludlum and all of those thrillers. So I think that sensibility, I took that sensibility into Star Wars, not deliberately. It's just that those were my influences. And so that's what I brought into the franchise. I was also, I think, really lucky that a little bit like Tim Zahn, who's used his Thrawn character to create sort of a series within a series. Because I got Cloak of Deception, and then I was able to write Dark Lord and one of the prequel tie-ins, and then Darth Plagueis. I was able to kind of have a through story that I wanted to tell.
Yeah.
In fact, I mean, I would have really loved to do a book that was exclusively about Palpatine. That would be sort of a part 2 for Darth Plagueis, where I would start with Palpatine, Sidious, just at the beginning of A New Hope, and take the whole saga through his point of view. And I'm sorry I never got to do that, because that would have, in my mind, that would have completed what I have been trying to do throughout the franchise.
That's just music to my ears, because my favorite characters in the whole thing.
It almost happened, but it's just I couldn't convince them. And I think that Disney was kind of going in a different direction at that point. Like the books were skewed. I don't know. Maybe this is a little judgmental, but I felt like they were skewing a little bit younger. They were trying to bring in a broader audience. So maybe it would have been too not profound or deep or anything like that, but it just wasn't in line with the kind of publishing that they wanted to do at that point.
That sort of answers one of the questions I had for you, that there was rumors that you wanted to do a prequel to that or a sequel, something like that.
Yeah, I did.
That's okay. It just never,
heartbreaking.
Never came to fruition.
I was telling Ron just before this that a lot of Plagueis as a novel is also a bit of a Sidious novel, because we're following the two of them. We see how Plagueis finds him, that sort of thing. And of course we end with, Sidious on top, and he's one of my favorite characters anyway. And it's cool that it's not just, obviously we have this big in-depth look at this character that was mentioned in the film, but to see the big bad of the whole thing kind of develop, it would have been amazing to see you keep that going.
I would have loved to have had a crack at that, honestly. But I think that window has closed.
How would you have done it? Would it have been specifically through his lens, or would it have been similar to Plagueis where there's a lot of events going on?
Good question. I'm not sure. It may have been like Plagueis where, I jumped away from Palpatine Sidious at a point to, bring other elements into the story. But I wanted it to be from his perspective, just even when he dissolves the Senate, that was going to be my starting point, and just go forward with it. I think I could have even worked with the notion of his, his reincarnation,
Yeah.
as it were, at the end. I mean, I think I could have worked that in, just tying in research that Plagueis had done, and I think it would have worked.
Are there any like real world or historical events or concepts that inspired you in any of these novels? Because I've noticed a big theme of, like I said, these political nuances that are occurring, especially in Darth Plagueis, but in many of the other books, these decisions that are these big characters are making that are risky but set up what we end up seeing in the films. Or, for example, how Sidious in this book positions himself to infiltrate all of politics. There are these little decisions he makes that you flesh out so well. Are there any like real world or historical contexts that you draw on when you're writing these pieces for Star Wars?
I did a lot of research of a sort for that. I mean, I can talk about Machiavelli and not real world, but there was a Shakespearean element that I was trying to get in there. Yeah, I was the mob.
Yeah.
I was thinking a lot about Capone's outfit and other things, when I was drawing from just about every source I could for that.
In reference to like legends and canons, do you approach it a little bit differently, knowing that it's going to be legends instead of canon, or how does that work when you're working on these books?
That's another slightly heartbreaking element to all this, because and I should have known this from work in other franchises, but it's sort of you're pitched an idea for a book, or you pitch a book, pitch an idea, and you think that that's going to be Creed. You think that's going to be canon. And it just doesn't work out that way. It gets overwritten, it gets changed. In the end, I think readers should sort of discount that notion of legends and canon and just read how they want to, and sort of develop their own sense of how events unfold. It's just weird to me that like Tarkin and Catalyst are now canon, where Plagueis and Cloak of Deception are not.
Right.
I don't know how to make that distinction, and I've never. That's never been in my mind as I've been writing. I've just always just tried to tell a story. I didn't want to be subjected to that, in a sense.
Now, in reference to like the Millennium Falcon, how did you go about that?
I that's funny about that book. I sort of did that as a favor. It wasn't my idea. It was pitched to me. I think that at that point, Del Rey wanted some sort of transitional book between the series that they were doing, and they wanted to tie up certain characters. I like the idea of being able to create a history for the ship itself. That was like the interesting part of it for me. I think that's one of my least liked books from fans, and I can kind of understand that. Yeah. I did it very quickly, and I didn't have it really. It wasn't clearly thought out. But I like I said, I did like the notion of making the ship a main character.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that part of it. I mean, I like the book, but it's such a cool ship. It's an iconic ship.
Yeah.
You were able to bring it to a little bit more life.
Right, but not canon.
Right.
Well, I wonder if it
not canon.
I wonder if it informed, how they went about doing the Solo movie, where the Millennium Falcon ends up with a very real personality that they plug into and talk to, similar to the.
You don't know like who's reading the book and who's taking something away from it like that.
Right.
Not sure.
Was wondering more about sorry, I lost the name of the book in my head, but there you do a really awesome job of bringing in characters that we know and also characters that are new to the novels. And how do you go about, is it challenging to take these characters that are in this universe big and have big implications in the films? Is it difficult to bring them into a story that you're creating, or is it helpful to sort of give some power to those narratives?
The big characters, Luke and Leia, Han, all they're in some sense, it's a kind of a conflict because we all can kind of hear them in our minds. Like we know what sounds like Han, or we know what sounds like Luke. So when you're writing those characters, you have to pay attention to that. You know, you can come up with a line and then read it back to yourself and say, no, Han would never say that. It just sort of leaps off the page.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it easy because we can hear them in our head. But on the other side of it, you want to do something fresh with those characters. But you're sort of confined. You're confined to the way those characters were established in the film. That's the way they have to be on the page.
Right.
So that's the way I've always approached those characters. As far as like lesser characters, I've always been a real proponent for continuity. I try and just use anything. I feel like that it expands the franchise to just bring in lesser known characters and make it one unified universe.
Mm-hmm.
Always been a real fan of that, and got some pushback about that when we first started to do the new Jedi Order, because the notion in the beginning was, well, let's do something completely different. Let's not rely on what Bantam did. Let's take off in a new direction. But it made no sense to me because here were these, I don't even know how many dozens of books
Mm-hmm.
where all these characters had been developed. And in my mind, they were part of Star Wars.
Right.
Couldn't abandon them. So we started to be able to bring all those Bantam characters into New Jedi Order.
Mm-hmm. On that note, do you, when you're writing either for New Jedi Order or one of your later Star Wars books, how much freedom did you have to sort of craft the story you wanted to tell? Or were you able to get resources from Lucasfilm to figure out, the continuity of things, or how did that all work?
Well, I don't know. I can't speak to the process for other writers. For me, it was always like I get an email from George or from one of George's lieutenants that would say, give us the backstory on the Trade Federation. And that would be it. Or give us the backstory on Plagueis. Or what is Pato Nemodia and how does that fit into the whole thing? And that would be it.
Yeah.
And then it would be up to me to find the story there. And one thing that we all had to do was we all had to write detailed outlines that were submitted to Lucasfilm. And then there was usually a little back and forth about the outline. But once you got approval for the outline, then you were free to just follow that and write your own book. There was always a lot of resource material available at Lucasfilm and people to speak to there if I had to know about a planet or know about the backstory on a character. But I was lucky. I didn't get a lot of pushback from. I was able to write the novels that I wanted to write.
Yeah. And I imagine it's a lot of work to be given an assignment like write a backstory for this character and that's it. You got to go.
Yeah, but that was great because it was a little bit like creating your own novel. Just I had to really dive deep and really come up with an engaging story. Mm-hmm. And where before that, when I was writing for Robotech, that was like an adaptation. The story was there. I was just sort of translating what was on screen into novel form.
Right.
But the Star Wars books were different because they did allow me all that latitude.
Mhm. That's awesome.
When you started writing Tarkin, how did you go about that? Did you look at and figure other things out, or do you sort of bring that stuff to life when you're writing?
With Tarkin, um, Lucasfilm had some general ideas about his background. Um, so I had a starting point there. But again, I just had to dive into the character and come up with a story. That was another one I think I got a lot of negative feedback about that, sort of chasing the ship all over all over the galaxy. But I enjoyed that book. I got to bring some of my own some of my personal experiences into that novel. So I enjoyed writing that.
That's cool.
I, for one, loved Tarkin, especially
Yeah.
some of the little details.
Yeah,
I believe
his
that's
upbringing. And,
yeah. The Imperial Creed that's in there, I think, isn't there like his personal credo or his message to the world, basically? It was awesome.
Yeah, and also a character that I just enjoyed from day one. You know, the first time I saw A New Hope, I just loved that character.
Yeah.
So that was another terrific assignment. You know, getting to write about Tarkin.
Yeah. Was it your? Were you ever already thinking about the Sith temple under the Jedi temple idea that came from that? Was that something you had already maybe wanted to put somewhere else, and you thought,
Yeah. I had that in mind, and you know, I think it seemed like I got to write about all the bad guys, which I kind of like because you know bad guys are interesting.
yeah,
You know, there's a lot you can do with villains that you can't do with heroes.
mm-hmm.
You've written, so many books in reference to different eras from the Clone Wars, up to the rise of the Empire. Is there an era or a time that you really enjoy, or are they all, pretty much the same, or do you like writing about one different era than the other?
Uh, Again, I've been fortunate because I've been able to set a lot of these books as tie-ins to the films.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really important to me. I had a great time on New Jedi Order, although I felt toward the end of that we couldn't take Han, Luke, and Leia through any more adventures.
Yeah.
That if it was up to me, it had to end there.
Yeah.
I enjoyed writing them, but by the time we were done with that, I really didn't want to revisit those characters again, although I had to in Millennium Falcon.
Right. In regard to era, I mentioned Catalyst earlier, where I understand with a little bit of a regime change with Lucasfilm in that general time. Did you have an idea of what had occurred in the film Rogue One? Did Catalyst come before the film was released?
Oh boy, that one was like a can of worms for me. Catalyst, yeah, because and again, I should have known better. I've done some novelizations, like I worked on Mission Impossible, I worked on The Shadow, I worked on The Mask of Zorro. So I should have understood that these direct movie tie-ins come with their own problems. And so I was writing Catalyst while the script was still being fine-tuned.
Oh.
And as the script changed, the novel had to change.
Mm-hmm.
And there was I was banging my head against the wall by the end of that book because they couldn't make up their minds about what they were going to do in the film.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to constantly go back in the book and change things. And I think I even quit that book a couple of times.
Yeah.
but was persuaded to stick it through. Like Um, I originally there were in the original my original outline for that book, I brought in some of the characters that are in the movie, but then after a long meeting at Lucasfilm or with the Disney group, they decided, oh no, you can't have any of those characters. We want you to set this, much earlier and just focus on the family. So I had to go back in, change everything again. And then there was always a controversy about whether Galen knew that he was working on the Death Star.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, it would be great. He's got to find out that he's working on the Death Star, because then we can have kind of an Oppenheimer, working on the atomic bomb kind of character.
Yeah.
But they said, no, he doesn't know. He doesn't know that he's working on the Death Star. Of course, when the film came out, he did know that he was.
Yeah.
So
Pretty big point.
Yeah. So so there was a lot of frustration involved in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With that being said, and sort of a good segue, what did you think about Rogue One and Andor? I mean, we have season 2 of Andor coming up. There's so much hype about it. I mean, we both loved it. I think that was one of the bigger ones, even though there's not a lot of, I guess, audience for it. It was sort of a slow burner, coming up. And then, this second season, we're going to go right into Rogue One, which you've delved into a little bit in backstories and stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
I love Rogue One. I think Rogue One turned out just great.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved Andor too. And I like stories like that in Star Wars, where you're not dealing with Jedi. You're just you're enlarging our sense of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
of our sense of the way people live on Coruscant or wherever. So I can't wait for that second season. When is that coming out?
April 22nd.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about time. Probably no one will remember what happened. It's been so long.
Yeah.
I think the first season, the first season is probably going to get more popular, because people are. I mean, I'm about halfway through the first season again, just to watch it and refresh to look up into that. In reference to all the characters that you've done, I know Plagueis obviously was a good one for you, and Tarkin. Was there one character that was more challenging than the other besides those two, or was it one of those two that because there is different characters, like you'd said in some of the books. Maybe you've touched on Yoda or Dooku or things like that. Is there one in particular that was more challenging than the other?
Well, going back to an earlier point, I think writing the main characters presented problems sometimes. Writing Han, trying to get Han down, or trying to get Leia down. They were more difficult than writing about Tarkin, or writing about Palpatine or Sidious, or any of those characters, just because they're so iconic.
Mm-hmm.
That I had to really, I think I probably struggled more getting their voices down than I did getting the other characters down. I liked writing about Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
And, I never did much with Yoda. Qui-Gon, I thought, was a really interesting character. One of the characters that I wish that I had more time to develop is Dooku. Mm-hmm. Although I think he's been pretty well developed in the Clone Wars animation series, and he had a big part in that.
Yeah. There recently, well, I guess a couple of years ago, there was a novel that Del Rey put out.
Exclusively about Dooku.
Yeah. And they also put out a little animated short series about Dooku and his flip that kind of draws on some of the things that we find in Plagueis that you might be interested in seeing. It's called Tales of the Jedi. They're these little.
Yeah, that's the one. You're right.
Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah. And, I think Dooku, I've said this before, he's kind of a linchpin in some ways for the series, because he knew more than he revealed. And, he could have risen to the top, I think.
Yeah.
And
he
things had gone a little differently. I think Sidious needed to get him out of the way,
Yeah.
Yeah.
or else he was going to be in big trouble.
Yeah. And he was the perfect catalyst, a little, you know, not to reference the book title there, but he's a catalyst for all of the mayhem that
Right.
Sidious was able to,
Right.
to orchestrate. And I liked seeing those two in Plagueis.
Hmm.
I liked the viewpoint of Plagueis, and I think you get a viewpoint from Palpatine about them, about, you know, hey, this Qui-Gon guy could be a problem.
Hmm.
Hey, you know, he annoys me with how good he is. I mean, that was one of the favorite parts about the.
Yeah, I'll have to read that Dooku novel. I hope. Yeah, I hope that the author did Dooku justice.
Yeah, it's interesting. It dives in a little bit to. I don't know if you're familiar with the Revenge of the Sith novelization.
I am very familiar.
Yeah, so there are parts of the novelization where, you know, you hear this voice that Anakin's hearing, and it gives you a little more context as to why he's slowly drifting away.
Yeah.
Similar thing happens with Dooku, although it's more principled and ideological sort of thing.
Yeah.
Kind of, you know, fooling himself into making these decisions. Well, if I just do this, you know, then everything will be good, despite the fact that he's about to do evil things, you know.
Great. Fantastic novelization, right?
Oh, yeah.
Have you spoken to Matt Stover?
No,
we
I'd
haven't.
love to.
Oh, you got to get him on
Yeah.
the podcast. Yeah.
It's my favorite novelization of all of them.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Matt is a terrific writer. He's really
like you said, I feel that him and yourself, you were writing stories that were very dense in terms of like Star Wars material, but also were not afraid to get a little darker and a little more, I guess adult would be the right word. Something I do miss a little bit about publications. But.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I was going to ask, you know. I think it is cool. Do you like writing about some of these bad guys, or is that a favorite for you, or just it is what it is, or is it just more intriguing when you're looking at these guys? I mean, there's some evil guys here, you know.
I do like exploring those characters because you know, I think there's the exploration of these gray areas, you know, like what turns a person evil, and does that person consider themselves to be evil, or, you know, is there a point of view where you can get the audience to wonder, you know, which side the character is really on? I mean, I think there's just a lot more depth. Like I was saying before, like heroes, you know, just have to shine brightly and they can go through all kinds of challenges, but in the end, for me, it's just not as interesting as writing about the bad guys.
Yeah.
You know?
One of the cooler things about seeing Sidious through your eyes in these books is it seems there's a distinction, at least with him, despite hearing the views of other villains in the series and their justifications, or like you said, you know, if they view themselves to be the villain. I love how in Plagueis, for example, when he meets Palpatine and Sidious, Palpatine, future Sidious, he recognizes like that guy is bad in the best way. and
that's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah, and I love the distinction because there's really no moral justification to be him, but it's in the best way. You know, I think you say he's the tip of the spear of 1,000 years of doing this, you know, whole thing.
Yeah.
And
bad guys can recognize each other.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. You know about that, Ron.
Oh. I do.
Yeah.
If you were given the chance, would you like to go back and delve into some Star Wars stuff in the future here if something does come up? I mean, because again, we have Plagueis that is now, you know, I mean, he was canon, but you know, we see him now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if that did come back, or maybe you're in the process of already being contacted. I'm not sure.
No, I'm not, and I think at this point I had my run, and I'm satisfied with that. I think I'd have a lot of catching up to do. I'm not sure. I you know I don't want to be disparaging, but working with the Disney group was a little bit different than working with George and
Yeah.
Skywalker. It became there were a lot more people weighing in on what they wanted from an author and what how the story should be told. Um, so I don't think I'd have the freedom that I had during what I consider my my golden years. I think it would be a little different. So I'll leave that to somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it was a great run, that's for
Yeah.
sure. I mean,
That's
some of
right.
these novels are incredible.
Well, I
When
appreciate that.
talking about George, I mean, now how did that work? Were you at Skywalker Ranch? Were you sitting in on different groups, or was this all through email at the time, or how did that go about?
I made many trips to Lucas to first to Skywalker Ranch and then to Lucasfilm when they moved to the Presidio in San Francisco. And most of my contact with George was via email or through his one of his seconds at Lucasfilm. But yes, I sat in on a lot of story meetings, especially during New Jedi Order, because when I came into that series, I was the one who wrote the initial Bible for that. So I was at all the story meetings that came after with different writers and trying to shepherd that series or steer that series in the way that we wanted to. I think for every book, I spent some time at Skywalker Ranch. I was out there with Matt when he met with George before he did the novelization. He got that hour with George where he got to sit down and ask him different questions
Right.
about the film. So that was cool.
Well, it's interesting you say that because there seems to be amongst the fandom, at least, there seems to be disagreement. And the funniest thing about it is people like us have no idea. There's just disagreement for the sake of disagreement. But there seems to be people on each end who are unsure how much involvement George used to have in the literature or that Lucasfilm used to have with the literature and how much coordination there was. And you have a lot of people who say there was none, a lot of people who say that George basically wrote it. And I think everyone understands that it's somewhat in the middle, that someone like you crafts the whole story and it gets approved or not, right? Or could you speak to any of that at all?
George separated himself from the literature. He put that in the hands of other people.
Mm-hmm.
When he did weigh in, it would be to say, no, you can't do that.
Okay.
We had a lot of that with the new Jedi Order. The first outline, he wrote back and said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. He didn't really say what we could do. It was just what we couldn't do.
Got it.
I would have specific questions like, is what species is Plagueis? And he did weigh in there and tell me what species Plagueis was.
Right.
So there were specific questions I could ask, but for the most part, he was not involved in the literature.
Got it.
That was a whole separate thing. In fact, from the very start, when going back all the way to Brian Daley's time, his dictum was, go ahead and do what you want with the literature, but I reserve the right to overwrite it in any of my films.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that is.
Yeah. I'm sure it at the same time allows you some freedom, but possibly some stress thinking that maybe I could write all this and have it get shot down by the big man.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You have to understand the rules,
mm-hmm.
And with Star Wars, it's pretty strict about where you can go and where you can't go, and what tone you can take, what tone you shouldn't take. That's why when you're talking about introducing a little bit of darkness, that's good, because normally Star Wars is pretty. It's not like a fairy tale, but it's pretty light.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to be aware of that. Every franchise is different. Sometimes the people who control the franchises are very, very strict and practically will give you an outline that they want you to follow.
Mm-hmm.
It was not like that with Star Wars. Every author had a lot of leeway.
Yeah.
And as long as they stayed within, they played by the rules, they're okay. Yeah.
In your opinion, what do you think separates a Sith like Palpatine and Darth Vader? Is there a difference in those two, do you think?
Oh, Sidious and Vader.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think, in my mind, and it's Nick, it's like what you said earlier that, Palpatine, he was destined to follow the path that he did.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Anakin, there was some choice, there was some agency involved, and he was sort of caught up in something where I think Sidious was always destined to be the evil character he became.
Mm-hmm.
And where would you put Plagueis in that? How would Plagueis fit into that?
I think Plagueis had a real game plan that even Sidious didn't have. I think if Plagueis had been able to live, things would have turned out differently. Yeah. I mean, we see what leaders can do when they have a game plan.
Yeah. And it's funny, I'm looking at the back of this book here, and it says Plagueis was the most powerful Sith Lord who ever lived, but could he be the only one who never died? And it's a funny, I don't know what, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I interpret that as, Plagueis could have been the top dog, like you said, a leader with the plan, but if Palpatine was the one who's destined to do it, he made it happen. And
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's the one who brought Palpatine into the fold.
Yep.
Sometimes you don't realize, what you're introducing into your game plan.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's
so
cool.
That's the tragedy, really.
Yeah. Right. And,
right.
And it's cool.
It is the tragedy.
The tragedy of the man himself. But
right.
I loved, obviously some of these characters are non-humans, but they have a very human element to them as they're written. But I loved, as the book goes along, it's very obvious the psychology of Plagueis getting increasingly paranoid about what the inevitability of what occurs, right? That, and that was one of my favorite parts, is he starts off as this brilliant, he's brilliant the whole way through, but he starts off as this brilliant, possibly the most powerful dude in the game. And yet as it goes along and we follow Sidious a little more, you can tell Plagueis is a little irritated, a little paranoid, a lot paranoid, I guess. Yeah. And it's an interesting take on this idea of this rule of two, and how these two are really the two guys who don't really see themselves following it in their end game. They see themselves as taking it to the, we're done with this, we're
right
of it. And it's kind of ironic as it's that Plagueis becomes so paranoid of the thing that he created.
Right. I think there's always that element of unpredictability that slips in. Even the best laid plan, there's something that you don't see. You can't control all of it. There are outside forces that are going to undermine you one way or another.
Yeah.
Whether you're Plagueis or Capone.
Yeah. Right. Taxes.
Damn. I only pay those taxes.
Yeah.
Did you bring in, especially with Plagueis, some of the financial stuff and political stuff? Was that obviously it was your own, but did you bring any of that in from the world that we have today, or stuff that you read in reference to Star Wars, or how did that go in reference to like financial stuff with Palpatine and Plagueis?
I think once we settled on his being, a kind of banker, that a lot of that just sort of developed naturally. I don't remember drawing on anything. I mean, it's funny with a novel because once an outline gives you kind of a roadmap, but then each chapter is suddenly taking you in a different place, and the novel's getting bigger and bigger, or taking turns that you didn't expect. And I'm a big one for that, because characters are always surprising me, or events are occurring that like I didn't see that coming. So I didn't really draw from real world. It just unfolded that way.
Yeah.
It's interesting how, particularly in that timeline when you have Cloak of Deception, Plagueis, even this one here, the Rise of Darth Vader. We know in the movies, it's stated all the time how corrupt everything is, and in the Phantom Menace, for example, a lot of Palpatine's lines on camera are, the Senate is just not what it used to be, and it's all his fault. He's doing it. Are those things that you kept in mind? Because there's so much of this awesome exposition about Sidious in this book, where he's laying those little traps all over and infiltrating and sort of taking Plagueis's plan and, unbeknownst to Plagueis, making it his own.
Yeah.
And were you watching these little moments in the movies to craft those maneuvers? Because it syncs up beautifully.
Yeah. And I love the notion of being two-faced like that. Just, creating a problem and sitting back and watching it unfold when you're really in control of it. I mean, that's really Sith manipulation, you can do that. I mean, there's a lot of real life stuff that, I could draw from there, whether it's, the mob in Las Vegas or anything else, where you're making things look one way. I mean, you're planning, you're allowing it to unfold, and you're really behind the scenes, creating it, manipulating it, bringing it exactly to the point where you want it to be.
Yeah. And it's those things in all of these books. And I really liked Cloak of Deception because it gave a little bit of insight of why all the characters are where they are in the Phantom Menace, but especially in Plagueis, in that lead up with that time frame where Sidious is making this big gamble on revealing himself to the Trade Federation and making a deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
And he's making the gamble based on they're going to be too greedy and too afraid of me to say no. Or and even for Sidious, who, is apparently the man with the plan, it's a risk, and you feel that risk. And I've always felt like, man, we see in the movie him take a lot of risks, but that was a really tense moment in the book. And was that something when you were drafting the outline or getting to know where these characters were going to go? That's a pretty big impasse point. It's a good big linchpin point for them incorporating their plans. Did you know that ahead of time, or did that evolve out of?
Yeah, that was not in the outline. That was one of those things that you just stumble across. Again, you get into kind of a zone. And you're almost, I think these things are being worked out unconsciously, and you're just the scribe, putting it down. So I can't tell you why that happened or when that occurred to me. It just makes its way into the book.
Yeah.
Talking about characters, when you're trying to figure out how you're going to decide, or deciding on which characters are going to do different things, like in Plagueis, Masanada, how did you come up with that? Or was that something that they wanted, in reference to, these characters deciding on the manipulation of the Republic, and you bring these characters into that?
They didn't ask for anything. I mean, that was all, from whole cloth. Yeah. I mean,
awesome.
I didn't have any help. And I wish I could give you a more complete answer, but now we're going back how many years? 10, 12,
Yeah.
and I'm getting older by the day. So,
So, in reference to characters again, you had previously mentioned that Dooku fascinates you.
yeah.
Is it him that if you could write one more or work on another character, would it be Dooku, or are there any characters that have fascinated you that you would want to build a story about or get
I
them
think,
closer?
well, if I gotten to do the Palpatine book, Dooku was going to play a big part in that, because I just wanted to have this early, it would have been early on, this tension between Plagueis, Sidious, and Dooku.
Mhm.
Because, and I think that like that triad would have been really interesting and really, I could have opened up a lot of paranoia among all of them. You know,
Yeah.
like what do we do with this guy? And you know, if we're not careful, you know,
Yeah.
because you know he had the wits, he had the strength,
Mhm.
he had the background. You know, he could have risen to the top, I think, if he played it a little bit differently.
Mhm.
So,
How do you think he could have played it? What could he have done differently?
well, he could have taken out Palpatine,
Yeah.
which you know I think would have been a great move.
Yeah.
Um, if he could have eliminated Palpatine and maybe formed a partnership with Plagueis,
Hmm.
who knows where that would have gone.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. That's one of those things where I've never really, you know, thought deeply about it, because I think, like I said, the window's shut and I'm probably not going to write it. But that would have been a fun thing to jump into
Hmm.
and just and see what evolved
Yeah.
from getting those characters together. And I don't know how did is there backstory on how Sidious survived being thrown down the
Little
shaft?
bit. Little
Yeah.
bit. How much time you got? I'm just kidding. Uh, the they were teeing up in sort of those new novels since Disney had acquired them. They were teeing up this little bit of, whispers that he was working on something that I think essentially bolstering up through some of the literature that he was always working on contingencies.
Right.
And
Makes sense.
yeah, similar to the expanded universe books, I can't remember which one it's called, where he does come back as a clone and fights Luke.
Right.
Essentially
Right. I remember
himself.
that. I remember that.
They've sort of gone into this vein similar to that, where he must have sort of made the leap spiritually to a body of himself, which had then failed him. So we see him in the film,
Right.
basically a corpse.
Right.
And in the novelization of The Rise of Skywalker, he says something that kind of rounds it out. I don't know why it didn't make it in the film, but Kylo Ren says to him, you're just a clone. And he says, I'm more than a clone, but less than a man. And that's basically all you get, that it failed. And now through all these shows, they're setting up this project, this secret project that's akin to the Death Star, called Project Necromancer. And it's very mysterious about how the Emperor demands that it has as much attention as something like the Death Star does, and no one really knows why. And they're working on
I like that.
Yeah, they're working on cloning force-sensitive people or taking force-sensitive blood. So it's basically Plagueis's
Right.
life, life goal, and Sidious can't figure it out.
I
And,
like that.
Yeah, and similar to how it ended up for Plagueis, he figured it out, but he was too paranoid to really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, there's a lot of that in I don't know if you've seen it yet, but the Bad Batch, the newest.
Oh, I haven't watched that, but I've heard about it. Yeah.
That's really cool, and they dive into that quite a bit. That Necromancer project. So it's
that's cool.
It's pretty dark too.
Yeah,
there's some good
it's
dark
presumably,
things there.
See, I've got catching up to do.
Yeah, it's presumably why, I don't know if you've seen The Mandalorian yet.
Yeah.
Grogu, it's presumably why they want him.
To
use
that's where they're going.
Yep, to use his blood and his, stuff to make these beings, you know, that could house him.
Nice.
But I think what the difficult part about it is that I don't know if even Sidious knows in the timeline whether it's going to work or not. You know, he has this grand plan in The Rise of Skywalker to use either Rey or Kylo Ren to bring him back, and then he kind of accidentally gets brought back because he realizes the two of them together are, you know, a life-giving entity, and it kind of accidentally works, which I could see, especially the way you write him. It's something that he maybe foresaw but didn't know how it was going to happen. So you know, he's stuck.
Wow.
With it. But so they're going back and sort of giving these little stories about his resurrection, if you will. But
oh, that's cool. You're getting me interested again.
yeah. And you know, last thing about that. Sorry.
No, you're good. Let's go.
There's some of the comics. I know you said you used to follow the comics.
Yeah.
There are these series recently, I guess in the last 10 years or so, that have kind of drawn on a little bit, but they're all about Darth Vader and about his early days in the suit, coming up as Darth Vader, hunting Jedi who are left over, constantly being berated by Sidious for maybe disappointing him a little bit. That dives into the fact that Sidious has been building like a cult, basically, and sending them out to the planet they end up on in the final film to build this thing for him.
Yeah.
And so he uses that as his leverage on Vader to say, like, you don't have it like I do, you know, and don't cross me. So
Excellent.
yeah. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, I like that. I like all that.
Yeah.
That's great.
But it really, honestly, it builds pretty firmly on stuff that you created. So I think we all owe it to you, characters like that. And
yeah, petition Disney to make it Legends.
Oh yeah,
Take it away from Legends.
Yeah, right.
Make it canon.
Yeah. I really honestly believe that most fans who have read Darth Plagueis consider it canon no matter what. So
yeah. Oh yeah, I would definitely agree with that. You know, and along with Tarkin as well. I don't think we're going to get too much. Hopefully, we'll get a little bit more Plagueis at this point. You know, they're still talking about the acolyte, but
I thought that was canceled though, right? They were going to do a second season of that.
Yeah, there's rumors, and you know, but I think it's canceled. But I think they are going to do some novelization and some comics. You know, just put some backstory in it, which will be pretty cool. But like Nick said, I think most people look at the stuff that you've done as canon, where some of the other stuff where, you know, Mara Jade and Luke get together, or Han and Leia, you know, they have these other kids and this and that. Now canon is Kylo Ren, you know, and it's Ben. You know, that's sort of it because it's canon now. But I think for yourself and in your books, because they do go into so much depth, but they also go into the lore that surrounds it, that you were able to combine both of those together, you know, and do that. And I think that's what's really cool about those. And that's why we enjoy them so much.
It's a testament to your care that you took and the research you took, that there's so much continuity with them that they not only stand alone, but like you said, they really, really bolster the films. You know, they're really important for understanding.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, you know, again, I guess it really doesn't matter whether they're Legends or canon. It's just, you know, people can take away what they want to take away.
Yeah, and I think that's just like any of the movies at this point. You know, I'm an OG like you. I saw everything in the theater.
Right.
When 1, 2, and 3 came out, wow, now we got a new surge of Star Wars.
Right.
And for 7, 8, and 9, they're not my favorite, but they're out there. It's canon at this point, so we're not going to change it. So we have to take it for what it's worth and enjoy everything. And then as they continue to bring stuff out, it just prolongs and it increases the universe of Star Wars.
Exactly.
For me, even though I was 10 years old when A New Hope came out or Star Wars came out.
You were 10?
Yeah, I was 10. I know you were a little older.
You were 10?
I was way older than him. But it's going to be, for me, it's going to be, you know, a lifelong thing.
Right.
As they continue to go, and as Disney, you know, a lot of people are this and that about Disney, but they still have Star Wars going. We don't know what George would have done with it as he, you know, gets into his elder age, you know, if he was going to continue it. But Disney has the money. We think they've done a great job with Skeleton Crew, Acolyte, all of these new ones that are coming out, and the animation. We both watch the animation and read the novels.
Right.
So I think that it's so cool that you're able to be a part of that, and a big part of it for what we're concerned about, because of these characters that you have brought to life even more in these novels, where you can hear what's going on in their mind. In the movies we don't get to see that or hear that. So I appreciate you doing that for us. It's been such a great journey.
Well, it's been a privilege. I mean, to write in that franchise. It really has. What's your favorite relic there that you have?
Oh,
you got a favorite?
It goes all the way around.
Is it really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm a huge Yoda guy, so I have a bunch of Yoda stuff that I really enjoy. I got the life-size one there by Nick.
Wow.
Which is the old school Yoda, which is one of my favorites that I picked up or acquired.
Cool. Yeah.
Ago.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's fun. Now, do you do any collecting at all? I know, like you said, you were a little bit. But, yeah.
No.
Nice.
I've never reread one of my books.
Oh. Do they kind of stick with you though, since
while I'm writing them, like I have no other life.
Yeah.
And then once, I finally read the galleys and I know, it's going to be published this way. It's like, I can't go back, because if I go back, I know I'm going to be thinking to myself, why did I write it? Why didn't I write that one? What was I thinking there? So I don't bother.
I think it's probably very similar to a music artist writing a song.
Yeah.
You spent so much time with it. Like I said at the beginning, these are the songs, or these books are like your kids. I mean, you spent so much time, blood, sweat, and tears, time away from your family, things like that, where you're going back probably and, okay, let me read this first chapter again and see how I'm going to get into this next character, or who do I need to bring in for that, So I think that's probably why, you don't go back and read your own books.
Well, I don't have to be on stage playing Hotel California
right
for the 4 millionth time.
Yeah. That's true.
I have one more Tarkin question for you.
Sure.
And do you think that he was one of the most powerful strategists? I know we have Thrawn that's coming out now. We're learning a lot more of him. I mean, I know we learned a lot of him in the books from Timothy back in the day, but now, like yourself, I thought that Tarkin was such a great character, and I think unfortunately it did go well. I mean, that they had to do that to him at the beginning of that movie, but the strategy and as we see now in some of these other things in Rogue One and in some of the Clone Wars, do you think he was as good a strategist as
Thrawn? Maybe. Yeah. No, I think he's probably more impulsive than Thrawn. Thrawn just seems like, he's thinking 4 or 5 steps ahead at all times. And I don't see Tarkin as thinking forward in that same degree. I think he had he was quick to draw,
Well, like in Rogue One, he wants to take the credit from from credit.
Well, even in even in A New Hope, when they say, "Hey, we've looked at their attack and there's something to this," and he's like, "Are you crazy? Not leaving?"
That's a little bit of pride there, right?
Yeah.
His downfall, his Achilles heel.
Do you think it's that's kind of a blend, because a lot of the things you bring to Tarkin are very true throughout the franchise, that these Imperials like Tarkin are very, very competitive, and it's a very dog-eat-dog situation. Do you think Tarkin's pride is personal or more truly about the Empire?
I think it's personal with him.
Yeah.
I think no matter which side he was on, he would have displayed the same kind of personal, approach to everything. It was glorification of Tarkin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Empire provided the right means for that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you ever see, or did they ever show you his arc in the Clone Wars animated series as a reference for your novel about him?
No.
Are you aware that it exists?
No.
He's,
No.
there's a Clone Wars arc where he, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka and a group of clones are kind of stranded on an enemy base.
What?
They have to work their way out. And Anakin and Tarkin are arguing the whole time about philosophy, ideology, and Tarkin's talking about how he thinks the Jedi are weak and shouldn't be. I shouldn't be answering to a Jedi general because you don't have what it takes to get things done. And Anakin kind of agrees with him. And they end this arc by saying to each other, like, I hated you, but I could work with you again someday. And it's this very ominous, Yeah.
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah. I think you'd like it.
I think I would too.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do such a good job. I think that's what helped bring everything back together as well. Like Disney wanted to bring more audience in with the Clone Wars because they do so much and there's so much character but just
development.
Thank you. Character development in theirs, which now we can go out and when we watch the 4, 5, and 6 or 1, 2, and 3, we have a little bit more background for these people, which I think is great.
But they've discontinued all the animation though, right? Like
so far, yes.
Yeah.
They put a bow on all of them. So the Clone Wars was previously unfinished, kind of.
Yeah.
And they added a season to close it out and even more.
Right.
And Rebels, they've sort of moved Rebels into that Ahsoka live action.
Oh, right.
A lot of those characters are in there, and I think they're going to bring some of it into the Mandalorian and Grogu movie as well, which will be pretty cool. Yeah, the other stuff has ended, but there are pretty good rumors that there is some new animation coming out, whether it's going to be 2 or 3 seasons like the Bad Batch, or if it's going to be longer, or if it's going to be like these, the little short ones that they just did with the Empire and the Jedi. So I think
it's so enormous now, isn't it?
It's crazy.
Well, talk about you.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, your goal of expanding the. We talked before. There's this. I think the latest animated thing was these shorts called Tales of the Empire, which are a lot like the Dooku.
Oh yeah, I've heard about those.
Yeah, and they go into these couple of characters that Ron and I think both said, I wasn't really asking about these characters, but I'm really interested in it. Actually kind of blows the story even more. And it's like, man, I didn't know I wanted that.
That's kind of Andor too. I mean, who would have thought? But I can't wait for that to come out.
Yeah. It's going to be great.
So phenomenal. They're
doing
like you said, I think it's cool because we get to see the rest of the universe where there's not lightsabers. There's not the Force per se.
Mm-hmm.
It's these normal people that are fighting for the rebellion. They're fighting for their freedom,
right?
Fighting for everybody else's freedom because they realize how corrupt, the Emperor is, and how everything's going on with that.
One thing that they're doing in Andor that I thought you did great in both Catalyst and Tarkin was showing that the Empire is not this mighty thing that we see in the films. So I think it's in Catalyst where the Empire's kind of, I know that was a tough one to write with all the script stuff, but the Empire is consolidating its power not by brute force, but by like corporations and technological advancements because they don't really have it yet.
Right.
And Tarkin, I think he's all paranoid, right? Because they don't have the ships yet, and they're kind of posturing like they do and they don't have it. And I think it's interesting to see that in Andor a little bit. Their intelligence agency is a little bit inept and too competitive, and it's all that same stuff that you wrote about.
Where did Andor leave off? Where he was out of prison? Is that where he left him?
And he went to his
broken out of prison.
He went to his mom's funeral.
Oh right.
Yeah. And there's a big explosion and fight everything.
Right. I'm going to have to do what you do. I'm going to have to rewatch everything.
And they're releasing it this time 4 episodes at a time, correct?
Oh, good.
Three episodes at a time for 4 weeks. So what it's doing is it's bringing you a year per these 3 episodes. So
Oh,
episodes will be 1 year. The next 3 episodes
nice.
the week after will be another year, and then right up into Rogue One, which will be pretty cool.
That is going to be terrific.
Yeah, yeah. And then they have Celebration in Tokyo a couple days before that. I think that it ends the 18th of April, and then they have that. So there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of panels now that they just put out in reference to Star Wars Celebration Tokyo. I think there's going to be some more announcements and stuff. We'll probably get some sneak peeks on the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, along with hopefully Ahsoka season 2,
Right.
which I thought was phenomenal. So I want to just step back a little bit in reference to the Plagueis book. When you were doing that, how did you go by with the rule of 2? Did you? I'm trying to think if the Darth or the other one, Bane, was out yet. Was Bane out by then?
Yeah, Bane was out.
So did you draw from some of that stuff for yourself to?
I referenced Bane, and that played a part in that novel. Yeah.
It's very interesting dynamic to Plagueis's paranoia when Sidious introduces Maul as an assassin, and
hey, wait a minute, you've taken an acolyte here?
Yeah. He's got a how'd you learn XR Coon style? I didn't teach you that.
There's trouble here.
Yeah. But did it interest you to dive that deep into like Sith philosophy? Because I know you said when you turned in the outline, they claimed you didn't know how to write them, and I think no one has ever written them better. So
it was funny to hear you don't understand it, because there wasn't a lot written about the philosophy of the Sith. It was sort of, we had vague notions of what it meant to be a Sith, but I think at that point it was sort of, the philosophy was still, bubbling up to the surface, with Bane and with other books.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that was really cool how you were able to bring that and just like Nick said, just bring it to life a little bit more and give us some more of that with the two of them. They're the ones I think that are closest to us, in the franchise. Yeah, the main books are great. They're cool. They give you that, but these two characters are right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And we've seen them. We've heard about them. So I think that's really cool that you were able to do that and bring that to us,
And one thing that I love, that I feel, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I've always liked when people write or display the Force as a character.
Yeah.
And I feel that in that novel, also the Dark Lord book, that these guys have this awesome plan and this amazing power, but they're always in this dialogue and struggle with the Force as if it's a character. And I've always appreciated that. And does that inform sort of like how you make the villains more interesting, that they're kind of fighting against this thing that naturally wants to be good?
Yeah.
And
and it's interesting that in New Jedi Order we got to go into that pretty deeply. That was one of the enjoyable things about writing the Unifying Force, because I got to kind of dig into what it might mean to go beyond what both the Sith and the Jedi know, like to step into something even higher.
Yeah,
that's more unifying, and that was fun to explore that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's really cool. James, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here with us.
My pleasure, Ron. Yeah,
and talk about this stuff. I mean, we could sit here and talk about it for hours. I'm sure you probably could a little bit, but like you said, it's stepped away. But I think it's really cool that you're able to still enjoy some of this stuff that's coming out.
I do.
Which is really neat. But it's been a pleasure talking to you. The information that you have, we enjoy the stuff that you put out tremendously. I think it's an honor to have you on here and to read your books, because you've done such a great job bringing the Star Wars universe even to more life and more lore, and the characters that you have written about are big players here, and I think that's really cool. So thanks again for that and for being here with us.
I really enjoyed it, and I want you guys to get Matt Stover on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would love to.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
And I got to tell you, I owe a great deal of gratitude to you because my relationship with the literature and with the story, a lot of what hooked me into my fascination and reading and all of that stuff was literally given to me by you. And it's really an honor to.
Nick, that's very kind of you to say.
I really appreciate
it. Very kind of you to say. Thank you.
Yeah, he's definitely the lore guy here. When we started out, I interviewed him just because we were friends and big into Star Wars, and and I said, hey, why don't you come on and co-host with me? We can play off of each other.
It's perfect.
We have that.
You guys are a great team.
Camaraderie.
Great
so
team. Yeah.
All
right, guys.
So much for being here, James. Here's some of his books. If you haven't read them yet, you have to go check them out. They're incredible. They're amazing. They're mind blowing, and the writing is just so spectacular. So, thank you. Check his books out, James. It was a pleasure.
Good to see you again.
Force be with you.
You too.
Yeah. Thank you, James.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.